Sonic Frontiers is a weird game. From the title screen, the soft piano music sets the tone for a subdued adventure, before we are thrust into perhaps the biggest Sonic game ever in terms of scale and ambition. Despite the imagery of speed and kinetic energy one unavoidably associates with the game's title and the sight of our blue protagonist, Frontiers feels like a slow burn for its first couple of hours. It's a game that promotes exploration while still being covered in linear platforming, a game that is full of surprises as well as an abundance of repetition, and an experience where at first you can only see the flaws until you realise what you're really playing.
Yeah, okay, sure. How about a little context?
The opening cutscene sees Eggman interact with a shrine to bring what appears to be the enemies of the game back to life. He is then sucked into some kind of cyber realm before we are introduced to our heroes, and Tails announces this game's setting as Starfall Island. The tornado is then sucked into a warp pole, and before even getting a feel of how the game controls, we are thrust into the first level. Reaching the end, Sonic appears back in the real world on Starfall Island. A voice in the sky tells us that we must defeat the Titans. Sonic, just as confused as we are, begins his quest. Frontiers strives to achieve multiple different goals as a video game, but simplicity is not one of them. Within the next couple of hours, we are about to be engrossed in the cauldron of concepts that this game presents. Initially, we start with a fairly narrow linear section with some basic platforming that will grow as the game progresses, collecting our first memory token and map challenge, as well as the first battle. The introduction to the combat feels shallow and clunky, but we are soon able to enter the main area of the first map. Looking ahead at an open grassy field with a melancholic soft soundtrack in the background, you can't help but be reminded about a certain other game on the Nintendo Switch. You'll soon forget about that though, as the cracks begin to show immediately. The grass textures are unappealing, certain objects lack animation and interactivity that feels as if it should be there, whilst others will disappear entirely when Sonic touches it. Your attention is drawn immediately to the gigantic Shadow of the Colossus style boss just standing there in front of you. Taking it down requires patience as the fight devolves into a clumsy and frustrating slog, raising alarm bells about the potentially awkward physics and controls we may have to deal with. Fortunately, this fight is more the exception rather than the rule, but a bad first impression right in front of the player's nose and this early on sets an awkward tone. Our first task is to save Amy, who is stuck in cyberspace, presumably along with Eggman and Tails. To do this, we need to collect memory tokens. Upon exploring the map, we discover some good platforming, but also some awful pop-in, emphasising the inescapable thought that this is just a B-rate Breath of the Wild clone, thus ending my first play session. Not exactly a good first impression, and whilst I enjoyed the opening traditional Sonic levels, Sonic Frontiers stumbles out of the blocks with its awkward attempt at an open world design. My first moments with the game left me asking myself one question. Why did they even make this? Then something weird happened. After gritting my teeth and carrying on for another couple of hours, I was left with a realisation. I didn't want to stop playing. I was enjoying collecting the tokens to get to the next cutscene, which in turn led to exploring more of the map where I would find more shrines. Frontiers provides an extremely addictive gameplay loop, despite its lack of polish. Every time I found my immersion breaking and not feeling in the experience, due to a pile of rocks disappearing or some PS1-esque pop-in, the cutscene would end and I'd find myself looking forward to collecting the next item or talking to the next character. I find many open world games often focus primarily on the authenticity and likability of their environments, landscapes and the world the game is set in, but the gameplay can many times be bland or undercooked. With Frontiers though, it's the other way around. The maps that you explore are pretty forgettable and the presentation is average at best, but the level design is strong, and the controls work so well that just moving through the map actually feels like a collection of 3D Sonic levels in itself. When exploring through the world, the key word to describe how it feels to play Frontiers is momentum. Often you are tasked with reacting to what is in front of you, whether it be changing direction on a rail, timing a double jump or air boost just right to get across a set of platforms, or hitting a homing attack into a spring or set of enemies before you fall down. You are almost always moving forward, and once you collect the item at the end of the gauntlet, there's bound to be a new challenge right in front of you to take on within the next few seconds. What's more impressive is that Frontiers achieves this speed and momentum without feeling automated, which is a criticism that has been levelled at this series since it began. You always feel in control and that you are achieving the goal at the end through your actions. The exploration in Frontiers is a surprising success. While it definitely doesn't compare to something like Breath of the Wild, I find it doesn't fall into the same boring gameplay loop that something like the Assassin's Creed games find themselves stuck in. Frontiers lies somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. There are icons on the map that you can follow to reach your next destination. The game will tell you how far away you are from them, but it won't tell you how to actually get there. And there's no sign of the dreaded dotted line that plagues many open world games at all. It seems that Sonic Team also recognised how genius that beam of light marker system was from Breath of the Wild and stole it wholesale. To be fair, it makes an excellent fit for finding the Chaos Emeralds. Collecting the memory tokens will allow you to trigger the next point in the story by talking to the ally character. Sometimes this will just trigger a cutscene and then you can move on to the next one. Other times you will have to complete a challenge or minigame to move on. Frontiers pushes the story and characters consistently as a driving force to your progress. Whether this works for you or not will depend on your tolerance for fan service, as Sonic Team delivers this in spades here. A 3D Sonic game where you only play as Sonic. The only returning side characters are Tails, Knuckles, Amy and Eggman. In other words, only the classic characters from the original 4 Mega Drive games are involved. Sage is the only major new character, and given the context and feel of Frontiers, Sega probably felt it necessary to introduce a new character. Thankfully, Sage is not overbearing or intrusive in terms of cutscenes or gameplay. The Sonic characters still feel like the main focus, as Sage becomes more likeable as you progress through the game, and plays an end role in the showdown with the final boss. There are other curiosities with the story as well. Dr. Eggman may be the catalyst that starts off our adventure, but is barely seen again after the opening cinematics. Sonic isn't even aware of Eggman's involvement in the narrative until about 3/4 of the way through the game. This leads to Sonic Frontiers feeling like the story does not have a real antagonist, which works in the game's favour. There are almost no interactions between the familiar cast of heroes and Eggman, and this is the first 3D Sonic game in over 20 years where there is no direct conflict between the two. Sonic is driven to finish his quest to save his friends, not to defeat his enemies, regardless of who is responsible. The version of Sonic we get in Sonic Frontiers feels heroic, altruistic, and generous. The more annoying and dated quirks of his character have also been removed, which results in perhaps the most likeable version of the character we've ever seen. Protagonists in fiction that are unambiguously perfect, as I believe Sonic is in this game, are often impossible to relate to and hard to be emotionally invested in. In the case of Frontiers though, it actually works. Having one character that is perfect accentuates the flaws and distress that his allies are under, and makes it more rewarding as they slowly improve and grow through the course of the game. However, Tails' "I always rely on you" angle did seem unnecessary.
Wow, and how did you come to this well thought out concern?
Whenever there's a crisis, I'm either running away or standing on the sidelines. You're always rescuing me when all I do is follow you around.
Not only had we already seen this in Sonic Adventure, but by this point Tails has proved himself as a capable hero by himself multiple times across several games. Sonic says as much himself, although this does result in some clever dialogue. One line in particular I loved was here when Sonic finally brings up the fact that in the Mega Drive games, Tails could run just as fast as him. My main criticism with the story is the insane amount of referencing to the previous games and other characters. Whilst the Sonic series has a few unquestionably awful games, in general I'm a huge fan of this series, and I also don't normally have anything against games in long-running series including features purely for the sake of fan service. However, even for me, Sonic Frontiers does this too much. There were some subtle references early on that I appreciated, such as this throwback to the waterfall from the Mystic Ruins from Sonic Adventure 1. Also some less subtle ones that I liked, such as Sonic and Knuckles reminiscing on the events of Sonic 3, with screenshots of the original game overlaying. However, as the game goes on, it becomes ridiculous as almost every character and every 3D Sonic game, as well as many of the 2D ones, are referenced. I'd be interested to hear what this is like to play from someone who hasn't played many Sonic games before, because some of these cutscenes must make no sense at all. There was one part in particular where I actually laughed out loud, not because the game was funny, but because both Sonic and Eggman, who were in 2 separate locations and talking to different characters, referenced 4 different Sonic games in a row. It's clear to everyone, including Sega and Sonic Team, that nostalgia has now become part of the DNA of this series, so I can see why they are just trying to embrace it, but this needs to be dialed back for future games before it loses any impact it has left. Outside of this, the story and cutscenes are deserving of praise. The characters are less annoying, more well-rounded, and more grounded. The voice acting across the board strikes the right balance between jeopardy and the playfulness we've come to expect. I'm also a huge fan of Mike Pollock's performance as Eggman. The longer he plays this character, the more impressive it becomes, because he doesn't just play it the same way with every game. I love that he is far more reserved this time to match the mood of the game, with the audio logs being some of my favourite lines.
I never really knew my cousin Maria. Everyone spoke of her like she was very special. All that love for someone who was gone when I was right there.
It's not going to win any awards, and nor should it, but Frontier's story works because it has self-respect without taking itself too seriously. There is no doubt that this is the most well-written and best-acted game in the series. Sometimes your mission won't be to find Amy, Knuckles or Tails, but instead to get a Chaos Emerald. The emeralds can be found out in the overworld, and in a smart move from Sonic Team, they can be found out of order and will become available as soon as you have enough keys. Finding the emeralds themselves are pretty easy, but you'll need those keys to take the emerald out of the pedestal. So how do you get keys? You get them by clearing portals. Frontiers yet again evokes similar comparisons to Breath of the Wild, this time with the portals comparable to Breath of the Wild's shrines. Rather than a puzzle room like in Zelda, Frontiers shrines are effectively traditional 3D Sonic Boost levels, a la Sonic Unleashed or Sonic Generations. For the sake of clarity, I will just refer to them as levels or shrines to keep with the Breath of the Wild terminology. But hold on, did you think you could just enter these stages? No, you need gears. So how do you get gears? You have to beat a Guardian, a boss who is walking around in the overworld. While the many hoops Sonic Frontiers makes you jump through may seem exhausting and convoluted, this gameplay structure did keep me engaged throughout more than one full playthrough. There is just enough variation between the tasks to keep things interesting, and also because you are never far away from the next goal, which hooks you in before the loop becomes stale. Beat the Guardians, you need to get a cog, use the cog to unlock a shrine, beat the stage to get the keys, use the keys to unlock the Chaos Emerald. As effective as this was for me, I think it wouldn't work if the shrines were of poor quality, because all of this collecting would become very frustrating without a satisfactory reward. Thankfully, these stages hit the mark. The controls are excellent. It feels effectively the same as it does in the overworld. Sonic is fast and exciting while still being in control. The weight and turning speed feels just right, so that at no point did moving through these levels feel unfair or that you could not react to the obstacles in front of you. Further still, if it doesn't feel right for you, don't worry, because amazingly, you can customize how you play in the options menu. This includes speed, acceleration, and turning speed, so Sonic will suit your playstyle. It's already one of the best games in the series to control, but this edition is a genius solution to the conundrum that is, how should Sonic control in 3D? The level design itself has its part to play here as well. There is always a safe distance between you and the next enemy, so at the very least you'll have time to react. Most of the enemies are spread apart, so if you combine this with the homing attack, you can almost use the enemies to create a set of platforms or keep Sonic's momentum moving forward. There are often springs and side platforms as well, so you generally have one last chance to save yourself if you mess up, provided that you react quickly enough. The stomp is as useful as it's ever been. When you're trying to finish the stage as quickly as possible, you can launch yourself forward with an air boost, kill your momentum dead before you fall into the abyss, and then boost again on the ground. It's kinetic, reactive, and fun. It's difficult to say whether these levels are as good as what we saw in Generations or Sonic Adventure 2, but the shrines in Frontiers are close to 3D Sonic at its best. It's not the same thing with each level either. Some stages are very complex with multiple paths and routes to master, others are shorter and pretty much a mad dash in a straight line. These are still high quality in their own right because the simplicity of the design allows for Sonic's movement to shine. Great examples of this include this drifting level. or the final level where you streetboard downhill. Meanwhile, other stages in the game feel like a fully fledged 2D Sonic level. Unfortunately, the motifs for these levels are mostly ripped from previous Sonic games. You've got aesthetics from Green Hill Zone, Chemical Plant, and Sky Sanctuary. It's extremely hard to justify Sonic Team reusing these settings again. This was fine in Sonic Generations, as the whole premise of that game was that it was supposed to be a celebration of Sonic's past. However, many of these level designs have been reused in Sonic Mania and Sonic Forces since then, and now yet again they appear in Sonic Frontiers. It's time now that we left these in the past. Particularly Green Hill Zone, which I've seen so many damn times, I'm not sure if I want to see it ever again. My final gripe with these stages is the ranking system. As said previously, the point of these shrines is to obtain keys, and you can get up to 4 per level. 1 for just finishing the stage, 1 for getting to the end with a certain number of rings, 1 for finding all 5 red rings, and 1 for getting an S rank. The first 2 keys are the basic ones, while the last 2 force you to master the stage in order to earn the key. The red rings are excellent because it stops you from rushing past everything and forces you to explore multiple routes. The game will also save any red rings you've collected, so you don't have to collect them all in one run. If you miss one, you can carry on forward to the end and try the stage again. No backtracking required. The S rank challenge, however, is a bit more questionable. Unlike previous games, there's no sign of a scoring system, and instead your rank is based entirely on the clear time. I have no problem with this system for this game. What I do have an issue with, in some cases, is the clear time requirement. Like many aspects of Sonic Frontiers, this feels unbalanced. Some levels get it right, where it is challenging enough that you have to really earn the top rank, but for others I was able to get it whilst exploring for red rings along the way. Some I couldn't get the best rank and the red rings at the same time, but upon restarting the level and just going for pure speed, I made the S rank easily. Meanwhile, there were a few that were very difficult. I wouldn't have an issue with this if the hard ones were left to the end, but Sonic Frontiers does not seem to have any kind of difficulty curve at all. Yes, the shrines can be completed in any order the player chooses, but the shrines do have a numbered order, so I felt safe in the assumption that the difficulty would ramp the further I progressed through the numbered order. This isn't the case, however. There are some levels later on that are very easy, whereas stage 1-2 is probably the hardest in the game to achieve an S rank. It's hard to know exactly what Sonic Team intended with awarding these 4 keys in each shrine. Some shrines feel like the intention was to allow the player to achieve all 4 on a single run, and others confusingly practically force multiple runs with a different focus each time. These criticisms aside, overall these stages are absolutely brilliant. So brilliant that I would like to see this be the send-off for the boost formula in the Sonic series. The boost formula has been going for 14 years since it debuted in Sonic Unleashed. Although it stumbled with Sonic Forces, it has in general been a big achievement in terms of rejuvenating the identity of how a 3D Sonic game should play. But 14 years is enough. Sonic Frontiers can bookend this chapter, and moving forward for this series, I would like to see a different method of movement for the main stages. Of course, these shrines are just the warm-up for the real thing. There is another type of shrine that you can find in each map, the true main event of Sonic Frontiers. Big is back, baby! When I said earlier that only the classic characters return, I actually meant except for Big the Cat, which is something I greatly appreciate. It may have been a huge mistake to bring Big into the Sonic series in the first place, but now that he is here, I'd like to see him appear in every Sonic game in some way. As predicted, Big Stage is a fishing minigame. You can't exactly finish these in the sense that you just keep playing unless you choose to leave, or if you run out of fishing coins. However, the game will tell you once you've caught every type of fish you can get in that stage. The fishing in Frontiers is as simple as it gets. First, cast the rod out to a spot close to the fish so that you have a better chance of getting a bite, although it does not really matter because the fish will swim to your bait anyway. Press A to start reeling in when they bite, Animal Crossing style, and then do this simple QTE to catch it. As laughably simple as this is, I'd be lying if I said I disliked it. I think as a minigame it just about works, partly because of the relaxing music and partly due to the interesting things that you can catch. Many of them will be real life fish, however the game does surprise you with a Sonic related twist. Highlights include a checkpoint, item boxes, and even the goalpost from Sonic 1. You can also catch some of these classic badniks, as I suppose they are technically fish. If you catch everything between the 4 fishing ponds, you can fill up the Fishopedia, but what is the point in all of this? Well, if Sonic Team achieved what they set out to do with these levels, it appears that the point of the Big the Cat levels is to completely break the entire game. When you catch a fish, you get tokens that you can spend on items that you can use in your quest. The bigger the fish, the more tokens that you receive. It costs you a certain number of fishing coins per cast, so you can't go on forever, but the issue is that you can buy everything with these tokens. Big sells strength upgrades, defense fruits, cocos in packs of 20, and even gears and keys. This completely devalues the point in taking on Guardians or playing the shrines. It's particularly egregious on the final map, where you can easily find the big stage a few minutes into starting. The game will eventually stop you from buying upgrades as items will go out of stock. However, this does not happen anywhere near soon enough, and you can still buy a ridiculous amount of items. That's not taking into account that you can sometimes catch gold tickets in the fishing ponds, which allow you to select one item to buy for free. It can take a bit of time to accrue enough tokens to buy as much as you want, but there's no challenge here at all. And it's still a lot faster than tracking down a boss and defeating it. It's also still faster than finding a shrine and then clearing 4 objectives to earn the keys. It's absolutely insane to me that if you use these fishing levels correctly, you can bypass a huge chunk of the gameplay entirely. My advice to someone playing Frontiers is to hold back on buying items and just play these levels until you catch everything. However, it should not be up to the player to have to regulate this for themselves, and it's unfortunate that the fishing levels are as broken as they are. All of this could have easily been resolved by making the stat boosting items go out of stock very quickly, and I really think that the keys and gears should not have been on sale at all. Again, very unbalanced. A lot of eyebrows were raised when it was revealed that Frontiers was going to have an experience point system and a skill tree which is used to unlock new moves for combat. Whether you are a fan of this idea or not is pretty much irrelevant, however, because Frontiers has perhaps the smallest skill tree I've ever seen. It also does not take many experience points to unlock everything. This brings me to one of the biggest issues I have with Frontiers, and that's its RPG elements. If we put aside the bizarreness of its inclusion in a Sonic game to begin with, the RPG elements are either woefully unbalanced or completely pointless. As mentioned, whilst the extra moves are very useful, the skill tree is tiny and you are guaranteed to unlock everything well before the end of a standard playthrough. You don't even need to do any of the optional stuff. You will be fully upgraded about 60% of the way through just by playing normally. This makes experience points worthless for a significant chunk of your playthrough. These experience points can only be used on the skill tree to unlock new moves. There is a separate system to upgrade Sonic himself. This is split into 4 different categories, each of which you can level up to level 99. These categories are speed, ring capacity, attack, and defense. The first 3 are self-explanatory, but defense needs to be clarified when taken in the context of a Sonic game. In Frontiers, you don't lose all of your rings when you get hit like in the classic games. You will lose a lot of them, but the higher your defense stat is, the less rings you lose when you get hit. Also, unlike the classic games, there is a cap on how many rings Sonic can hold, which can be upgraded. You can level up your attack by collecting hearts, defense by collecting fruit, and the speed/ring capacity are both upgraded by cocos. This would be a clever move by introducing some decision making, which is essential to any RPG or any game with RPG elements, but both of these stats are almost completely pointless. The ring capacity stat is slightly useful, but the issue is that the starting capacity is relatively high, so only a handful of level ups will sort you out for an entire playthrough. Then there is the speed stat. You may think, how can a speed stat possibly be useless in a Sonic game? That's what I thought as well, which is why I spent almost all of my cocos on speed on my first playthrough, until I noticed about halfway through that I didn't feel like there was much difference in my speed despite multiple level ups. Initially I assumed this was just because the upgrade with each level was so minimal and the improvement so gradual that that I just did not notice it. Then upon starting my second playthrough on hard mode, my speed felt the same even though I was at level 1. It turns out my suspicions were correct. Whilst the game does technically increase Sonic's speed, the upgrades are so negligible that the difference between level 1 and level 99 is barely noticeable. That's not the difference between level 1 and level 10, not the difference between level 1 and level 50, but between level 1 and level 99 the difference is barely noticeable. My recommendation is to not even bother upgrading speed because it will make no tangible difference at all. At least the attack and defense stats do work well, and furthermore they are not only more useful, but much more fun to upgrade as you go along anyway. Whilst the Cocos are just collected randomly at certain points on the map, or bought from the fishing shrines, the hearts and fruit are rewarded to you by completing challenges that you would be trying to beat anyway, such as the map challenges. Finishing these will also unlock more of the map, which is essential to completing the game. Getting them all will also allow you to warp to any shrine. Aside from the reward, it has intrinsic value because tracking down these challenges and completing them is probably the most enjoyable part of Sonic Frontiers, apart from the shrines. It's impressive how varied and creative these challenges are. In conclusion, the RPG elements in Sonic Frontiers feel, well again, weird and unbalanced. The attack and defense stats are a success. However, the ring capacity is not that useful and speed is worthless. By extension, this completely devalues the Cocos as a collectible. The skill tree nearly worked, but it is far too quick and easy to unlock everything. Overall, these new additions do not ruin the game, but they are just horribly unbalanced. The combat is an interesting aspect of this game because it's given a bigger focus than I expected, but still takes a back seat to the open world exploration and platforming. This is a positive thing because I don't think I ever want to see a main series Sonic game be about the combat over the momentum based platforming, but you do still have to fight Guardians out in the overworld. There is also a Titan fight at the end of each map, so a robust combat system is needed to stop the game becoming a frustrating mess. The best thing that I can say about the combat is that it gets the essentials right. The combat is fast, punchy and reactive in keeping with the Sonic gameplay. At first, your only options are throwing basic punches and kicks and the homing attack. However, as you unlock more of the skill tree, you learn new moves and combos. It's somewhat enjoyable to see these combos rip enemies apart, but these moves are far too easy to pull off. You can rack up multiple hits and start to drain the life bars of enemies and bosses once you get used to these combos, which does not take too long. Of course, at the very start, it's not so easy, and going in with no idea about the combat, my jaw nearly hit the floor when I saw the sight of an actual combo meter in a Sonic game. The problem is, and I know this will surprise you, but it is very unbalanced. There would be nothing wrong with some of the combos and special moves being easy to pull off if, for example, they weren't so effective, or perhaps if they had a large cooldown window, making Sonic vulnerable. This isn't the case though. They are easy to use, they are safe options, and they tear everything apart. This Sonic Boom type move is particularly broken, especially considering that you only have to hold the left trigger to use it. I also think that they should have gone out of their way to nerf the boost during battles, or maybe stop you from using it entirely, because if you are in trouble, you can just boost away to safety, collect some rings, and then boost back into the fight, killing any real sense of jeopardy. For me, the best Guardian fights were the ones where the boss had something interesting going on in the environment around them. My favourites include this turtle thing that sucks you into a tornado to start the fight. This means that you can't run away and you have to time homing attacks correctly to destroy its jet engines and attack him properly. I also love this sumo fight. He traps you in this arena thing that is almost like some kind of boxing ring with electrified ropes, so you have to bounce off them at the right angle to knock him into the electrified ropes and zap him. Some of the worst examples of combat, on the other hand, is the Sand Shark, because this QTE sequence just goes on forever, resulting in long periods of time where you can't do any damage. I'm also not a fan of the Squid Guardian, because not only can it be a pain to land on the light trail and actually start the fight, but you have to then chase him, and during this section you can only really boost and sidestep his attacks. Incidentally, I found this to be one of the hardest fights in the game, because you can only afford to get hit a couple of times, as there is no way to get your rings back for this boss. Another reason why the combat is easier than it should be is the parry system, because not only can you parry everything, rather than just say weak moves or projectiles, but you can also just hold the shoulder buttons to keep Sonic in the parry stance for as long as you want, and then when the attack touches you, Sonic will always parry it. It's a shame because this could have been a huge positive for the combat if the game forced you to actually time the parry just before you get hit. You know, like practically every other parry mechanic in practically every other action game. But in Frontiers, it doesn't. As it is now, the parry system is a failure and far too safe and rewarding. Despite the issues I have with the combat, I'd actually say that overall it's a strong part of Frontiers. If this was a pure character action game, I wouldn't be so kind, but for Sonic Frontiers it works, and Sonic Team succeeded in what they set out to do. It may be more shallow than it first appears, but it's still flashy and dynamic enough to be enjoyable. I'd like to see some of these moves return for Sonic in the next Smash Bros. Game. Overall, I'd say that it gets the key areas right, but the smaller details wrong, particularly in terms of the skill ceiling and balancing of overpowered moves. The combat does bring up another issue with Sonic Frontiers, however, as this is the only aspect of the game that is affected by the multiple difficulty settings. You can play on easy, normal or hard, and the differences between them are... I'm not sure. I played the game in full on normal and then again on hard, and I couldn't tell the difference. Difficulty settings in video games that must be chosen before the game begins has never felt right to me, as it requires the player to make a decision based on no information. Before even starting the game, the player is tasked with choosing easy, normal or hard, with no information regarding on what those settings will even change, or which one will be best for them. This is obviously not exclusive to Sonic Frontiers, but I think most games would benefit from putting their best foot forward and just having one standard difficulty that showcases the game at its best. We've all played games that are technically harder and higher difficulties, but also much less fun to play. At least hard mode is available from the start here. Regardless, the difference in difficulty settings in Sonic Frontiers must be extremely minimal, because I didn't even notice it. The different difficulties also only affect combat and make no change to any other aspect of the game, such as the platforming. All of this is to say that this game should have not even had multiple difficulty options. They should have gone with one standard difficulty and maybe an optional easy mode for children or new gamers. For all its faults, Sonic Frontiers balances itself out with its strengths. The general gameplay is so strong and the maps so fun to explore that at times I felt like Sonic Team were really onto something special. That is until you get about halfway through the third map. There's no terrible disaster here that sees a massive drop in quality, but by this point the repetitive structure has now become an almighty grind. It's the same thing repeated again for the third map in a row. Collect the memory tokens, find your friends, collect more memory tokens, watch the cutscene, get a few keys from levels, get the Chaos Emerald, unlock the entrance to the Titan, fight the Titan. In the first map you save Amy, the second map you save Knuckles, and in the third one you save Tails, but the process is the same each time. This also means that Sonic has to keep losing the Chaos Emeralds in order to get them back again in the next map. This becomes farcical at the start of the second map, as he just conveniently gets hit by a laser beam and loses them, or at the start of the third map where he lands on the ground and they fly away for no reason. I guess he just ran out of rings or something. I remember thinking while finding the memory tokens and running towards Tails for the 10th time that this game needed to end now, which is never a good sign, especially as there are another 2 maps after this. Thankfully though, they are much shorter and the 4th map doesn't even have anything to collect in it. Still, as much as I enjoyed Sonic Frontiers, it wears out its welcome far before the end of the runtime. Before we complete the third map and move on to the end game, it's time to address the Titans themselves. Again, each one is set up the same way. You get a scripted interaction with them early on in the map, which results in Sonic nearly dying each time, emphasising that he needs to turn super to win. Once you have 6 of the 7 Chaos Emeralds, you must clear some kind of challenge to gain access to the Titan's lair, and then once you start the fight, you have to climb to the top of the Titan as it holds the final Chaos Emerald. turning you into Super Sonic and beginning the fight proper. Repetition aside, the Titans are a massive highlight of this game, because any shred of refined gameplay is intentionally tossed out the window in favour of over-the-top, adrenaline-fueled madness. Whilst still regular Sonic, both the initial interactions with the Titan early on and the beginning of the fight where you have to climb it and gain the Chaos Emerald are some of the most exhilarating scripted set pieces in the series. The actual gameplay and input from the player is quite basic, but the sheer spectacle of what is unfolding in front of you makes it impossible to forget. The second Titan fight against Wyvern is particularly amazing as you climb this huge tower to intercept it. The supersonic phase is equally as thrilling. The Titans have huge health bars, so the pressure is against you to win before you run out of rings. The combat system remains the same as the regular game though, so Frontiers rewards you for improving on this, as you will need to use your combos on the Titans to have any chance of success. Each fight ends with a crazy and satisfying conclusion. My only criticism is the second part of this equation, the part where you have to unlock access to the Titan's lair. In the first map, you have to solve this puzzle where you align the laser beams in the correct way. This is the best one because it's genuinely pretty difficult and takes a lot of thought to complete. You can't just brute force it and get lucky. In the second map, you have to use a crane to pick up balls and put them in the correct coloured slot. Okay. Then in the third map you have to hack this computer by playing an Ikaruga style shmup minigame, and then following that you have to play pinball. Sorry, what? I don't know what they were thinking with this. It has nothing to do with the rest of the game, but not only that, it is infuriating. You have to earn a ridiculous amount of points to win, which takes ages, and remember, this is pinball. It's pretty much just luck anyway. After finally beating the third Titan, we have reached the fourth map. We are now approaching the end game. There's nothing to collect in this one. Sonic just has to platform his way up to the top of these 6 towers to save his friends. He is effectively dying now because of the corruption from cyberspace. Sonic's condition doesn't affect the speed, movement or gameplay at all in this section though, giving us an unfortunately genuine example here of ludonarrative dissonance. I think an opportunity was missed to create a truly effective scene where Sonic gets gradually slower and you lose your abilities one by one with each tower. I could see a scenario by the end where Sonic can't even do the homing attack or jump, forcing the player to temporarily find new ways to traverse the environment. He could then collapse at the top of the final tower. Instead, we only see this in the cutscenes, which is nowhere near as meaningful. Sonic scales the final tower, but Knuckles, Tails and Amy do not allow him to sacrifice himself, as all 3 of them and Sage are now stuck in cyberspace. You enter the 5th and final map, which is similar to the first one. The all too familiar structure repeats itself again, but this time you have to save Sage. With 6 of the 7 Chaos Emeralds, Eggman finally reveals himself and fulfills Sage's request of teaming up with Sonic to save Starfall Island by giving him the final Chaos Emerald. Following another climactic, albeit relatively easy Titan-style fight, our heroes have won, but not without one of the most interesting and somber endings the series has ever seen. Sonic Frontiers is a weird game, and I'm still not 100% sure how I feel about it. This is a game which is very rough around the edges, but can also feel refined. The controls and movement are excellent, whereas the environments are lacking and feel unpolished. The graphics are pretty good during general gameplay and cutscenes, but are ruined by pop-in and awful textures when you get too close. The gameplay loop is viciously addictive for a while, but then wears out its welcome towards the end. The combat is flashy and enjoyable, but too easy. The RPG elements were a good idea, but fall down under any scrutiny. At times I thought I was playing something truly brilliant, because whilst the flaws are disappointing, they are also easy to ignore. The exploration of the map feels like a continuous flowing 3D Sonic game at its best. I can criticise Frontiers all day, but you can't ignore the fact that the shrines are so good that on their own, they arguably make this one of the best 3D Sonic games. Sonic Team have also made the brilliant decision to allow you to select and play them in any order you want through the arcade mode. I would say that this is worth the price of admission alone, but you have to finish the game in order to unlock this, which won't be worth it for some players. If you're already a fan of this series, then Sonic Frontiers is a must play. For any skeptics, it is more difficult to recommend, but I'd say it's definitely worth a gamble. The positives are too strong to ignore. There is an amazing game somewhere within Sonic Frontiers, but it never quite reaches those heights for a sustainable period of time. In the end, it's somewhere between good and great, but even after 2 full playthroughs, I'm not quite sure where it fits in that spectrum, probably somewhere in the middle. Sonic Frontiers takes risks, and it's an interesting step for the franchise. If nothing else, Sonic Team should be proud of what they have created here for those reasons alone. Sonic Frontiers unfortunately makes a lot of bizarre mistakes in its presentation and design, but in its best moments, flowing through an open world at full speed, Sonic Frontiers is also a very fun game. I'll take that any day, as long as it has the heart to make it all worth it.